Battle of the planet. Let's play hardball. Good evening. I'm Chris Matthews in Washington. And depending on your view of science, today is a landmark date in world history, human history. If you believe that man is hurting the future of life on this planet by the burning of fossil fuels, affecting climate and therefore the human habitat, today's a day to remember with pride. President Obama just announced an historic deal with China to cap emissions by the largest carbon polluter in the world. If, however, you are the new incoming chairman of the Senate Environment Committee, all this science and all this deal-making is just a hoax, just like evolution and other advances in human understanding of life on this planet. More than that, it's an affront to God, an abomination of Scripture. Here is James Inhofe of Oklahoma on the impossibility of climate change. It's from Genesis, quote, "As long as the earth remains, there will be seed time and harvest, cold and heat, winter and summer, day and night." In other words, man, no matter his destructiveness, intended or not, cannot hurt the health of the planet. He cannot affect the environment. This from a man who claims to represent Oklahoma, scene of the Dust Bowl of the 1930s when fields turned to dust thrown by the winds till people couldn't see and had to flee to California. Droughts alone, by the way, didn't cause that horror. It was man's abuse of the land, overgrazing and exhausting the topsoil. Now to the real world today. China is pledging to cap its carbon emissions by the year 2030. They will also invest heavily in clean energy. In exchange, the U.S., which is currently the second biggest carbon polluter, has pledged to slash emissions by up to 28% by 2025. Well, the New York Times described the deal as remarkable. The Associated Press called it groundbreaking. On the Republican Planet of the Apes, however, the deal is being called a charade. Just hours after it was announced, Senator Mitch McConnell slammed it as a failure and a partisan attack. Watch.
The problem is the president continues to send signals that he has no intention of moving toward the middle. I was particularly distressed by the deal apparently he's reached with the Chinese on his current trip, which, as I read the agreement, requires the Chinese to do nothing at all for 16 years, while these carbon emission regulations are creating havoc in my state and other states around the country.
Well, today's deal is just the beginning of the president's war on the Republican Flat Earth Society of climate change deniers. Politico reports that the Obama administration is set to roll out a series of climate and pollution measures that rivals any president's environmental actions of the past quarter century. David Corn, of course, is the Washington bureau chief with Mother Jones. And John Brabender is, of course, the Republican strategist. He's been dubbed the political guru to Rick Santorum's entire career.
I'm sure that's how he introduced
Let's talk about this, because climate change is often put on the back burner politically. But this is a pretty big deal. I mean, if the president's going to get anything in record, cutting a deal with China reminds me of the old SALT talks with the Soviet Union, where we did get them to stop building weapons.
This is a big deal because it's a conceptual breakthrough. Because up to now, China has been reluctant to pledge any details about cutting back emissions. And what they're going to do, their emissions will grow and cap and then come down, and ours are coming down because we've already polluted our way to prosperity. They're still in the middle of doing so. So Republicans are making a big deal out of this asymmetry. But the nations of the world...
What's the Republican plan?
There is no plan. They don't believe in science. And the big, you got to this in your great intro, Chris. The big point here, are we going to have policies that are based on science and rational thought? Or are we just going to read the Bible, which people are free to do, and say everything will work out? That seems to be a pretty clear divide, and that's really what's happening here. So when Mitch McConnell gets out there, he doesn't have a plan. He has nothing to say about the science and the policy. It's just a partisan attack because dealing with climate change means dealing with coal.
Why does Jim Inhofe, I don't know the fellow, I know he's from Oklahoma, which makes sense. Why is he using the Bible to oppose climate change, saying we can't affect it? Why is he doing that?
That's a Jim Inhofe question. But I will say this. First of all, it's very clear that evidently,
if that's his best
evidently
case,
the president must have whispered in the ears of the Chinese that he could be more flexible on negotiating climate change after the election, because the deal that he just negotiated, as Senator McConnell pointed out, was ridiculous. You give the Chinese 16 years to try.
How many years would you give them?
No, that's not the whole point.
No, it is the point. You guys don't have a plan.
The negotiation was we made a commitment to what the United States is going to do, and the Chinese made a commitment to try.
No.
And India wasn't even at the table.
No. Yeah, John, if this is how you guys are going to go about this, it's never going to happen. Right now, China has hundreds of thousands of people still living in abject poverty. They're using coal-fired stoves inside their own houses. So it's not unfair for China to say we have to go build our way out of prosperity, and we'll start tapering off because you have already done that.
You know what, David?
So
there's a lot of Americans who are worried about their job. And let me ask you this: if you're a coal miner in West Virginia, are you sitting there today and saying because of what Obama did, your job, your family's income, what puts food on the table for your family, is more secure? No. If you're a small business owner, no. So I don't care as much about China as I do.
Does being in the arms business justify wars?
No,
if you say if a guy makes a living doing something, we have to keep doing it.
No, the question.
What I'm saying though is we have to look at American perspective. Second of all, what this president did.
Tobacco.
Okay. Let me ask you a question about.
Tobacco farmers are a good example here. We came to the point when we realized that tobacco was killing people, and yes, doing something about it, doing education efforts would hurt those farmers.
Coal and shale are making us energy independent.
Okay. But it's also killing the planet.
Let's take a look at Mitch McConnell. He's one of the leaders, of course, of the Republican Party right now, and he is very much a guy against this whole discussion we're having, which now includes a new batch, by the way, of new allies of elected senators like Joni Ernst of Iowa. Let's watch McConnell in action here, because he's right at this fight.
I'm not a scientist. I am interested in protecting Kentucky's economy.
I don't know the science behind climate change. I can't say one way or another what is the direct impact. I do believe in protecting our environment, but without the job-killing regulations that are coming out of the EPA.
I'm not qualified to debate the science over climate change, but I am astute enough to understand that every proposal that has come out of this administration to deal with climate change involves hurting our economy and killing American jobs.
You know what? Let's go to something pretty basic here. U.S. senators and U.S. congresspeople. I used to be one of them. I have a lot of staff people. They do a lot of work for them. Yeah. They can do executive summaries. They can make it easy. They give them a little reading list to take home at night. They do have some free time to read. And they're legislating on issues of environment. Why do they keep saying in your party, I don't know? How can you keep saying I don't know?
Because the arrogance of the Obama administration is they've come to a conclusion that all the scientists have said one thing when that's
97%.
No, that is not true. It's not 97%. There's very prominent scientists who say they don't know.
John, there was a great ad during the Reagan years. If there's a bear in the woods, what do we do? In this instance, a predominance of scientific thought says there is a bear in the woods and it's going to chew up the planet. So what do you do about it? If you want to, you can always find 2 or 3 scientists who will deny anything. Anyway. But the predominant thought is that this is happening, it's real, and we have a limited amount of time. But are you saying then we should just ignore that?
I want to know why.
So what would you do differently?
I'm saying the arrogance of this president to not even let leaders of Republican or Democrat Party know he's doing it. Second of all,
that's not the issue here, John.
Why down in Louisiana now did Mary Landrieu coming out and say we need the XL pipeline?
Because she represents the oil industry.
The irony is she understands what people want.
She represents the oil industry. That's why. Let's take a look. Well, if you're a Republican with ambition these days, denying science is your ticket. This is how a sampling, by the way, of the 2016 field has some full-fledged climate deniers among it.
We have, real data about 100 years. So somebody tell me what 100 years data is in an Earth that's 4.6 billion years old. My guess is that the conclusions that you make from that are not conclusive.
I do not believe that human activity is causing these dramatic changes to our climate the way these scientists are portraying it.
It's really a beautifully concocted scheme, because they know the Earth is going to cool and warm, and so it's been on a warming trend, so they say, let's take advantage of that and say that we need the government to come in and regulate your life some more.
It is not unanimous amongst scientists that it is disproportionately man-made. What I think on the left I get a little tired of is this idea that, the sanctimonious idea that somehow science has decided all this and so therefore you can't have a view.
Do you believe climate change is real?
I'm always troubled by a theory that fits every perfect situation. Back in the 70s, I remember the 70s, we were told there was global cooling.
We got to hand it to Ted Cruz. He's got a hell of a memory. He was actually born in December of 1970. He was between the ages of 0 and 9 back when he remembered all this debate about the climate cooling.
Yeah.
I was older than him then, and I don't remember it, but he remembered it when he was like 2. What is he talking about?
Everything we just heard in that super cut is disproven and has no basis in what we know about science. Rand Paul's wrong about 100 years of data. We have scientists who've drilled down, have gotten thousands and epical times.
Well, what's this about? Protecting the Koch brothers oil industry? Oil and gas?
But the question is,
why is the Republican Party the party of oil and gas?
I don't know why. Maybe because I don't understand why the Republican Party is so anti-science, and the idea that, like, well, I have a different view, it's just you're sanctimonious if I say my unscientific view is not as legitimate as that based on the science. These talking points they come up with seem to be effective, but at the same point they're irrational, and they are just there because that's what they want to say.
Let me talk about the Republican Party. Has the Republican Party changed that much? Wasn't the party of Teddy Roosevelt in conservation? That was Teddy Roosevelt. Your party used to believe in conservation.
The problem you have is the American people agree with you. Tom Steyer spent $70 million making the exact point David is trying to make in all the targeted Senate races. Where were the people marching to the polls saying, oh my gosh, we got to stop?
So I know you do on every one of these discussions. Every time we talk climate change, you say, it won't sell, the people aren't interested, it affects jobs. Why don't you talk about science? And talk whether it's true or not.
I'm happy to talk about science. And the truth of the matter is science doesn't agree on this issue. And there's two issues.
There is such an overwhelming consensus, you can't say that. There is an overwhelming consensus on this
let's take a look
point.
at it. Let's go to Imhoff, the guy who's going to call his shots. He's head of the Science Committee now, as of this January, coming in. The biggest climate denier in the Republican Party now is going to run, as I said, the Senate's Committee on the Environment. Here's Senator Jim Inhofe of Oklahoma in his own words.
The notion that man-made gases, anthropogenic gases, CO2, cause global warming is probably the greatest hoax ever perpetrated on the American people. This 97%, that doesn't mean anything. Regulating cap and trade is a bureaucrat's dream. If you regulate carbon, you regulate life. My point is, God's still up there. And this is the arrogance of people who think that we, human beings, would be able to change what he is doing in the climate is, to me, outrageous. You might remember it was 2003 when I made the statement that the idea that man-made gases, CO2, are causing catastrophic global warming is the greatest hoax ever perpetrated on the American people. And I was hated at that time, but now people realize I was right. The fact that all this is happening is due to man-made gases, I really believe is the greatest hoax ever perpetrated on the American people.
What do you make of him using Genesis?
Well, look, what he wants to use as an illustrative point, that's up to him. I'm not going to play that game here. I don't think it's right. But I do think that what you have to understand is this argument comes down to 3 different points on climate. Number one is the numbers too small of a time period to know if it's accurate or is an aberration? Number 2 is it man-caused? And there's disagreement on that. And number three is, what is the net effect? Is it really that dramatic or not?
But we have science that has been studying this for 30, 40, 50 years, and they've answered these questions, John, if you care. George H.W. Bush went to Rio because he accepted the science. George W. Bush accepted the science.
This is why.
Now, in the last guys have flipped.
Where do you put this as far as, where do you think this is as far as issues that American people care about?
I'm talking about should policy and the politicians who advocate policy be based on science or not. Put aside public opinion for now. It's important, but it's not always the most important thing. And Rick Santorum, who ran as a principled conservative, would agree with that point. He wasn't always in line with popular opinion.
We have to stop now, but I want to remind everybody why this is the Republican Party's position in the next election. They're not going to let anybody like you or me moderate a debate because they don't want questions about evolution and these basic information questions to be asked to them because they're embarrassing. I think your party doesn't want to be debating this stuff. They don't want to be debating evolution and all their other beliefs.
I think they're happy to do that. What they don't want to do is, like last time, have 20 debates where the main topic is things on contraception, where there's nobody in the Republican Party that thinks we should do anything to limit contraception, but all of a sudden you start debating.
Who brought up the issue of contraception last election? Rick Santorum brought it up.
The first time it ever came up was in a debate by a moderator.
Okay, we have the tape, and we'll play it for tomorrow night. Just in your honor, we'll play because, as Ray said, we ought to be talking about birth control, as Rick Santorum said. Anyway, thank you, but we have tape here, and I'm not sarcastic. Is it fair to say we can use tape here?
Well, it dates you a little bit. But other than
Thank
that,
you, David
it's fine.
Korn
So-
and John Brabender for the defense. Coming up, Democrats have just won victory over the NRA out in Colorado. Do you believe it? They got back 2 seats from the NRA. Last year, the gun lobby and its allies recalled 2 Democrats in the middle of their terms and rammed through 2 pro-gun Republicans. Well, last Tuesday, it was pushback time for the Democrats and the gun control people.